Victoria Whitman adjusted her Hermes scarf as she stepped out of her white Tesla Model S onto the pristine driveway of her Scarsdale mansion. At 42, she embodied everything her late husband's old money had afforded her, from her perfectly highlighted blonde hair to her custom Louboutin heels that never touched anything less refined than Italian marble. The morning sun caught the diamonds on her wedding ring, a habit she'd kept despite being widowed for 3 years. More for the social status it maintained than any lingering sentiment. "Mrs. Whitman, your usual latte is ready," called Marcus, the young barista at Cafe Aristocrat, the exclusive coffee house where membership required a 6-figure annual fee and a background check. She nodded with the practiced smile she reserved for service workers, polite but distant, acknowledging their existence without actual engagement. Her 16-year-old daughter Emma sat across from her at their usual corner table, the one that offered the best view of the other patrons and ensured they were seen by the right people. Emma scrolled through her phone, occasionally glancing up with the practiced disinterest that came naturally to teenagers raised in affluent Westchester County. "Did you see Sarah's new Birkin?" Victoria asked, gesturing toward a woman 3 tables over. $25,000. Her husband's hedge fund must be doing well. Emma barely looked up. "Mom, do you ever think about people who can't afford coffee like this?" Victoria's laugh was light and dismissive. "Darling, everyone makes choices. We work hard for what we have." She sipped her $12 latte, completely unaware of the irony. "Your father built his investment firm from nothing. Success isn't handed to anyone." The conversation was interrupted when a young black man in work clothes entered, clearly lost and uncomfortable in the upscale environment. He approached the counter hesitantly, speaking quietly to Marcus about directions to a delivery address. Several patrons glanced over with expressions ranging from curiosity to mild annoyance. Victoria watched the interaction with detached interest. "Poor thing, he's clearly in the wrong neighborhood," she murmured to Emma. "Probably got his GPS mixed up." "These delivery services really should train their people better about where they belong." Emma frowned slightly but said nothing, returning to her phone. The man left quickly after getting directions, and Victoria had already forgotten about him by the time she finished her latte. "Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment. And it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. Victoria's weekly lunch at the Westchester Country Club was a sacred ritual, one that reinforced everything she believed about social order and personal achievement. Seated at a table overlooking the perfectly manicured golf course, she shared grilled salmon and opinions with her closest friends, Priscilla Hartford, whose husband owned a chain of luxury car dealerships, and Diane Pemberton, a real estate mogul who specialized in estates over $5 million. "I'm telling you, Victoria, the decline of this neighborhood is heartbreaking," Priscilla said, dabbing her mouth with the club's monogrammed linen napkin. "Yesterday, I saw 3 of those delivery trucks parked on Maple Street at the same time." 3! It's like we're living in some commercial district." Victoria nodded knowingly. "It's the new residents, darling. They order everything online instead of shopping properly. No sense of community standards." She paused, considering her words carefully. "Don't misunderstand me. I'm not prejudiced against anyone. But there's something to be said for understanding social boundaries. When people don't respect the character of a neighborhood, everyone suffers." Diane leaned in conspiratorially. "Speaking of boundaries, did you hear about the Mitchell family on Elm Street? Their daughter is dating someone from, well, let's just say not from our circles. The parents are mortified. How tragic for them," Victoria replied, genuinely sympathetic. "Children today don't understand that we're not being narrow-minded when we encourage them to date within their social sphere. It's about shared values, similar backgrounds, compatible life goals. A mother's job is to guide her children towards success and stability." Her internal monologue continued as she drove home through the tree-lined streets of her exclusive neighborhood. She wasn't racist, she reminded herself. She donated to charity. She was polite to everyone. She judged people by their character, not their color. But character, in her understanding, was largely reflected by the choices people made, the work they pursued, the neighborhoods they could afford, the education they valued. In Victoria's mind, society functioned best when everyone understood their role and played it well. She worked hard to maintain her position just as others worked hard in theirs. The fact that some people ended up in service positions while others ended up in executive boardrooms was simply a matter of personal choices, family values, and individual effort. That evening, as she helped Emma with college preparatory paperwork for elite universities, Victoria felt a deep satisfaction. This was how progress happened. Each generation building on the success of the previous one, maintaining standards, preserving excellence. The Scarsdale Farmers Market on Saturday morning was Victoria's favorite weekly performance. She moved through the organic produce stalls with practiced elegance, her Burberry trench coat perfectly pressed despite the casual setting. This wasn't just grocery shopping, it was social networking, community positioning, and virtue signaling all wrapped into one aesthetically pleasing package. Mrs. Whitman called Janet Rosenberg, president of the Parent-Teacher Association at Emma's private preparatory academy. How lovely to see you. Are you still chairing the scholarship committee? Victoria's smile brightened with genuine pleasure. Of course, darling. It's so important to give deserving students opportunities. She emphasized the word deserving with the subtle inflection that indicated her committee had very specific criteria for worthiness. At the artisanal bread stand, she waited patiently while the vendor, a young black woman with natural hair and calloused hands, finished with the customer ahead of her. When her turn came, Victoria's tone became distinctly more measured, her words carefully enunciated as if speaking to someone with limited comprehension. I'd like the whole grain sourdough, please. The $12 loaf. She handed over exact change, avoiding direct hand contact, and smiled with the particular warmth she reserved for service interactions. Kind, but clearly maintaining hierarchy. Beautiful day, isn't it? The vendor said cheerfully. Yes, Victoria replied, her attention already shifting to the next stall. Missing the woman's college diploma displayed proudly behind the bread samples, and the small sign indicating she owned 3 successful bakeries across the county. Near the flour stand, she encountered Mrs. Chen, whose husband had recently been promoted to partner at a major law firm. The conversation flowed easily, 2 mothers discussing their children's achievements, comparing notes on college applications, sharing concerns about maintaining academic excellence. Emma's applying to Yale early decision, Victoria mentioned casually. Her father's alma mater, of course. Legacy admissions are so wonderful. They help preserve institutional traditions. As she arranged her purchases in the Tesla's trunk, Victoria noticed a familiar figure across the parking lot. The same black delivery driver from the coffee shop was loading packages into a van marked Quick Serve Logistics. He moved efficiently, checking addresses on his phone, clearly focused on his route. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the parking lot. He nodded politely, a gesture she returned with the same measured courtesy she'd shown the bread vendor. Professional, appropriate, distant. Some people work so hard, she mused to herself, starting the car. It's admirable, really. Everyone contributing to society in their own way. The thought made her feel generous and enlightened. As she drove home through streets where houses cost more than most people earned in a decade, the collision happened at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon outside Mercy General Hospital, where Victoria was leaving her monthly volunteer shift reading to pediatric patients, AIO's commitment that satisfied both her social obligations and her genuine desire to contribute meaningfully to her community. Her phone was pressed to her ear as she navigated the hospital parking garage, discussing Emma's upcoming college interviews with her private counselor. Harvard's admissions committee responds well to demonstrated leadership, she was saying, juggling her designer purse and volunteer badge while searching for her car keys. She didn't see the delivery van backing out of a space 2 rows over, and the driver, focused on a challenging address on his GPS, didn't. Immediately noticed the woman in the expensive coat walking directly into his path while distracted by her phone conversation. The van's bumper barely brushed Victoria's shoulder, but the shock sent her stumbling backward, her phone clattering across the concrete as her carefully composed world momentarily shattered. "Ma'am!" "Oh God, I'm so sorry!" The driver was out of the van instantly, his face filled with genuine concern and alarm. "Are you hurt? Should I call someone?" Victoria looked up to see the same black delivery driver she'd noticed twice before, first at the coffee shop, then at the farmer's market. Up close, she could see he was probably in his early 30s, tall and lean with intelligent brown eyes that were currently filled with worry. "I'm fine," she said curtly, brushing off her coat and looking around for her phone. "It was just an accident. Let me help you," he said, spotting her phone near the van's rear tire. "I think the screen might be cracked." He handed it to her carefully, and she noticed his hands were clean despite his work, his nails neat, his manner respectful but not subservient. "Thank you." Her tone was cool, professional, the way she might thank a bank teller or store clerk. She examined the phone, a spider web crack across the corner but still functional. "Look, I have insurance through my company," he said, pulling out his own phone. "Let me get my supervisor on the line. We need to document this properly, make sure any damage gets covered." Victoria stared at him, surprised by his immediate accountability. In her experience, service workers typically tried to minimize incidents, avoid responsibility, let problems disappear into bureaucratic mazes. "That's not necessary," she said slowly. "It was barely a tap. Ma'am, you could have been seriously hurt. I should have been more careful backing out. This is my fault and I need to make it right." He was already dialing, speaking quickly to someone about insurance procedures and incident reports. As she waited, Victoria found herself studying him more closely. His uniform was clean and well-fitted. His speech was articulate, professional, lacking any of the grammatical markers she unconsciously associated with his occupation. When he finished the call, he turned back to her with the same concerned expression. "My supervisor wants me to get your contact information just in case any issues come up later. Sometimes injuries don't show up immediately." "I said I'm fine," Victoria repeated, but with less conviction. There was something unsettling about his competence, his refusal to let the incident slide, his assumption of responsibility that contradicted her expectations. "I understand, ma'am, but I'd feel better knowing how to reach you if needed." Against her better judgment, she gave him her business card, the one with her charity work contact information, not her personal details. As he carefully wrote down the information, she noticed his handwriting was neat, educated. "Thank you for being so understanding," he said. "I'm really sorry this happened." Driving home in unusual silence, Victoria found herself replaying the encounter. Something about it disturbed her in ways she couldn't quite identify. Not the accident itself, that was minor, but the driver's response, his professionalism, his immediate accountability, challenged assumptions she hadn't even realized she was making. The cracked phone screen became an unwelcome reminder that appeared dozens of times throughout each day. Every time Victoria checked messages, made calls, or browsed social media, she saw the spider web pattern spreading across the corner of her device, and with it came the memory of intelligent brown eyes filled with genuine concern. 3 days after the incident, she found herself distracted during her regular Thursday afternoon at the Westchester Day Spa, only half listening as Priscilla recounted the latest neighborhood association meeting drama. And then he had the audacity to suggest we install more streetlights on Maple Street for safety reasons, Priscilla was saying, her voice dripping with disdain, as if our neighborhood has safety concerns. "Really? Some people just don't understand the character we're trying to maintain." Victoria murmured, her mind elsewhere. She kept thinking about how the delivery driver had insisted on proper insurance documentation, how he'd taken full responsibility without any prompting, how his first concern had been her well-being rather than protecting himself from liability. That evening at dinner, Emma was unusually talkative about her community service hours at the local food bank, a requirement for college, applications that Victoria had initially seen as a necessary box to check, rather than meaningful engagement. "Mom, you should see some of the families who come in," Emma said, pushing her organic quinoa around her plate. "There was this one guy today, probably about your age, who's working 3 jobs but still can't afford groceries for his kids because one of them has diabetes and the medical costs are insane." Victoria looked up from her own meal, prepared by their housekeeper, served on china that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "That's very sad, sweetheart. I hope the food bank was able to help." He was actually really grateful, but also embarrassed, you know? Like he kept apologizing for needing help, explaining that he's normally self-sufficient but medical emergencies can destroy anyone's budget. Emma paused, studying her mother's face. It made me think about how we just assume people are poor because they're lazy or don't work hard enough. Victoria felt an uncomfortable stirring in her chest. Well, darling, every situation is different. I'm sure he's doing his best. That's just it, Mom. He is doing his best. He works harder than most people we know, but the system is set up so that one medical crisis can wipe out years of savings. It's not about personal choices or family values. Sometimes it's just about luck. Later that night, Victoria stood in her walk-in closet, surrounded by clothes that cost more than many people's annual salaries, and tried to push away the growing discomfort in her mind. She wasn't responsible for economic inequality. She and her late husband had worked hard for their success. They'd earned their lifestyle through good decisions, smart investments, and personal discipline. But the delivery driver's face kept intruding on her self-assurance. His immediate accountability, his articulate communication, his genuine concern for her well-being despite the potential consequences to himself. She found herself wondering about his story. Why was someone so responsible and professional working in delivery services? What circumstances had led him there? And why did her assumptions about his capabilities feel less certain now than they had a week ago? The questions followed her into restless sleep, where dreams mixed luxury cars with work vans, designer coffee shops with hospital parking garages, and the growing suspicion that her understanding of the world might be more limited than she'd ever imagined. Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment, and it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. Victoria's perception shifted completely the following Saturday morning when she witnessed something that shattered her carefully constructed assumptions about Marcus Thompson, though. She wouldn't learn his name until later. She was leaving her weekly therapy appointment, grief counseling that she'd never mentioned, to her social circle, considering it a private matter, when she saw the familiar delivery van parked outside Roosevelt Elementary School in nearby Mount Vernon. The school was clearly underfunded compared to Emma's private academy, paint peeling on exterior walls, a playground with equipment that had seen better decades. Windows covered with colorful student artwork that couldn't quite mask the building's institutional weariness. Curiosity compelled her to park across the street and observe. Marcus emerged from the van carrying not packages but boxes of what appeared to be books and school supplies. He was greeted enthusiastically by a young black teacher who helped him unload box after box of materials. Mr. Marcus called a group of children who had spotted him through the classroom windows. They pressed their faces against the glass, waving excitedly. He smiled and waved back, his entire demeanor transforming from the professional politeness she'd witnessed during their accident to genuine warmth and joy. Victoria watched, transfixed, as Marcus spent the next hour helping the teacher organize the donated supplies. Through the classroom windows, she could see him reading to a small group of children, his animated expressions making them laugh and lean in closer. When a delivery truck from his actual job arrived, he quickly coordinated with his replacement driver, clearly having arranged his volunteer time around his work schedule. As he prepared to leave, an elderly black woman approached him, someone Victoria recognized as Mrs. Washington, who cleaned office buildings downtown and took 3 buses to reach the affluent areas where she worked. "Marcus, baby, I can't thank you enough," Mrs. Washington was saying, her voice carrying across the quiet street. "LaShawn's reading has improved so much since you started tutoring him. His teacher says he's almost caught up to grade level." "It's my pleasure, Mrs. W," Marcus replied, accepting a small container of what looked like homemade cookies. "LaShawn's a smart kid. He just needed someone to believe in him." "You're too good to us," the older woman continued. "Working all day, then coming here to help our babies read, organizing supply drives on your own time and money. Your mama raised you right?" Victoria sat in her car stunned. This was the same man she'd categorized as just another service worker, someone whose accident with her had been a minor inconvenience in her privileged world. But here he was, volunteering his limited free time to help underprivileged children, using his own resources to purchase educational materials, providing one-on-one tutoring for struggling students. As Marcus drove away, he passed Victoria's parked Mercedes without noticing her. She remained sitting there for another 20 minutes, watching the children in the playground, seeing their joy and energy despite the school's obvious resource limitations. For the first time in years, Victoria felt the uncomfortable weight of genuine shame. Not embarrassment about being seen in the wrong place, not concern about social judgment, but actual shame about her assumptions, her prejudices, her willful blindness to the complexity of other people's lives. The drive home through increasingly affluent neighborhoods felt different now. Every manicured lawn, every luxury car, every mansion seemed to ask silent questions about privilege, responsibility, and the true meaning of character. That evening, she found herself researching Roosevelt Elementary online, learning about funding disparities, reading about teachers who spent their own salaries on classroom supplies, discovering the achievement gaps that resulted from systemic inequalities rather than personal failings. Marcus Thompson, she learned from a local newspaper feature about community volunteers, was a college graduate with a degree in education who had been laid off from his teaching position during budget cuts 3 years earlier. He'd taken the delivery job to support his elderly mother while continuing to volunteer at schools and tutor children for free. Victoria closed her laptop and stared out at her perfectly appointed living room, seeing it clearly for the first time in years. The revelation about Marcus should have been a private epiphany, something Victoria processed quietly while gradually adjusting her worldview. Instead, her curiosity led to a series of conversations that exposed just how deeply her social circle was invested in maintaining their shared assumptions about race, class, and merit. It started innocently enough at the country club's annual charity auction, where Victoria found herself studying the event with new eyes. The wealthy white patrons bid enthusiastically on vacation packages and luxury items, celebrating their generosity while maintaining comfortable distance from the actual recipients of their charity. Diane, have you ever visited any of the schools our donations support? Victoria asked during a break between auction items. Diane Pemberton looked puzzled by the question. Visit them? Darling, that's what the foundation administrators are for. We provide the funding. They handle the implementation. I just wondered about the actual impact of our contributions. Victoria pressed gently. Whether the children are getting what they need. Victoria, you're being unusually philosophical tonight, Priscilla interjected with a laugh. Of course they're getting what they need. Poor children have always found ways to succeed when they apply themselves. Look at all the success stories. People who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps despite humble beginnings. The conversation continued, but Victoria found herself increasingly uncomfortable with her friend's casual dismissal of systemic challenges. When she mentioned seeing a dedicated teacher working with limited resources, Priscilla's response was swift and certain. The problem with public schools isn't funding, dear. It's culture. When families don't prioritize education, when children aren't taught respect and discipline at home, no amount of money can fix that. She sipped her wine confidently. Thank God we can afford to send our children to proper schools where they're surrounded by families who share our values. Later that week, Victoria's tentative questions about social mobility and educational equality at her book club meeting were met with similar responses. Margaret Thornberry, whose husband owned a private equity firm, was particularly vocal. Victoria, I'm concerned about this sudden interest in social justice, Margaret said with the concerned tone usually reserved for discussing someone's potential drinking problem. Of course, we all care about helping the less fortunate, but we must be realistic about what help can accomplish. Some people succeed despite obstacles and others don't. That's not society's fault. It's human nature. The pushback extended to her family. When she mentioned to her sister Catherine, a plastic surgeon married to a prominent attorney, that she was reconsidering some of her assumptions about poverty and race, Catherine's response was swift and pointed. Victoria, I hope you're not having some kind of guilt-induced breakdown about being successful, Catherine said during their weekly phone call. We've worked hard for everything we have. Dad worked 70-hour weeks to build his business so we could have better lives than he did. Being ashamed of success doesn't help anyone. I'm not ashamed of success. Kat, I'm just questioning whether everyone has the same opportunities to succeed. Everyone in America has opportunities, Victoria. That's what makes this country great. Some people make good choices, others don't. Some people work hard, others want everything handed to them. It's not our job to feel guilty about making the right choices. Even Emma seemed puzzled by her mother's evolving perspective. When Victoria suggested they volunteer together at Roosevelt Elementary, Emma's response revealed how deeply privilege had shaped her own worldview. "Mom, I already do community service at the food bank. Isn't that enough? Besides, I need to focus on college applications. Admissions committees want to see leadership in activities, not just random volunteering." Each conversation reinforced the social pressure to maintain existing beliefs, to see charity as sufficient engagement with inequality, to interpret systemic problems as individual failings. Victoria felt increasingly isolated, caught between her growing awareness and her social world's resistance to examining uncomfortable truths. But Marcus's face kept returning to her thoughts, his patience with the children, his commitment despite his own struggles, his dignity in the face of circumstances that had nothing to do with his character or capabilities. The opportunity for honest conversation came 3 weeks later at the most unlikely location, the emergency room at Mercy General Hospital, where Victoria found herself at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night after Emma had been rushed there with severe stomach pains that turned out to be appendicitis. While Emma was being prepped for emergency surgery, Victoria paced the waiting room in a fog of maternal anxiety, her usual composure completely shattered. The surgery was routine, the doctors assured her, but fear had a way of stripping away social pretenses and revealing the raw humanity beneath. She was surprised to see Marcus Thompson emerge from the elevator, still wearing his delivery uniform, his face etched with the same worry she was feeling. He spotted her immediately, the only person in designer clothes among the working-class families who populated the late-night emergency room. "Mrs. Whitman?" He approached hesitantly. "I hope everything's okay. My daughter Emma is having emergency surgery," Victoria said, her voice shaky with exhaustion and fear. "Appendicitis. They say it's routine, but she's your baby, and routine doesn't mean anything when it's your child," Marcus finished, his understanding immediate and genuine. "I'm here with my mother. She had chest pains earlier, but thank God it was just stress and exhaustion. She works too hard for her age." They sat in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, two parents united by worry that transcended their usual social boundaries. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital waiting room, Victoria's expensive clothes looked out of place, while Marcus's work uniform seemed perfectly appropriate for the setting. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said after they'd waited in companionable silence for several minutes. "And please be honest with me." Marcus nodded, his expression open but cautious. "That day we had the accident, did you think did I seem—" She struggled with the words. "I've been thinking about how I acted, and I'm wondering if I came across as prejudiced." Marcus considered the question carefully. "You were polite, professional. You treated me like someone doing a job." "That's not what I'm asking." "I know." He was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his response. "Mrs. Whitman, you want honesty? You treated me like I was invisible until I became a problem. Then you treated me like a problem until I proved I wasn't going to be one. Then you treated me like a function, someone who existed to handle a situation and disappear." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to listen. "I don't think you're a bad person," Marcus continued. "I think you're a person who's never had to think about people like me as actual people. We're just background. The guy who delivers packages, the woman who cleans offices, the man who fixes your car. We exist when you need something, and we disappear when you don't." "That's horrible," Victoria whispered. "It's normal," Marcus replied without bitterness. "Most people in your position do the same thing. The difference is, most people don't sit in hospital waiting rooms at midnight asking delivery drivers for honest feedback. Why do you think I'm asking now?" Marcus studied her face, taking in the genuine distress, the absence of defensive anger that usually accompanied such conversations. "I think something shifted for you. I don't know what, but something made you start seeing people you didn't see before." Victoria found herself telling him about witnessing his volunteer work at Roosevelt Elementary, about her growing questions regarding privilege and opportunity, about the resistance she'd encountered from friends and family when she'd started questioning her assumptions. "It's frightening," she admitted, "realizing how much I didn't know about the world, how wrong I was about people. how much damage my ignorance might have caused. The damage isn't in not knowing, Marcus said quietly. The damage is in not caring enough to learn. But you're here asking questions. That's not nothing. When the surgeon came to tell Victoria that Emma's operation had been successful, Marcus squeezed her shoulder gently and said, "See, I told you routine means routine." As they prepared to leave, Emma to a recovery room, Marcus to check on his mother, Victoria felt something fundamental had shifted between them. Not friendship yet, perhaps, but recognition. Humanity acknowledging humanity across lines that had seemed impermeable just hours before. The crisis came 2 months later, and it arrived in the form of a petition circulating through Victoria's neighborhood association demanding the regulation of commercial vehicle traffic on residential streets. The language was carefully neutral, but the intent was unmistakable: to limit delivery services, food trucks, and other vehicles associated with working-class jobs from entering their exclusive enclave. Victoria stared at the petition, passed to her by neighbor Helen Morrison with a knowing smile and the comment, "Finally, someone's addressing the decline in our neighborhood standards." The petition had been prompted by what Helen described as an incident the previous week. Marcus Thompson, making a delivery to a house where the family was hosting a birthday party for their 7-year-old daughter, had been confronted by 3 neighbors who demanded to know why he was loitering in the area. When he'd explained he was making a scheduled delivery, they'd insisted on escorting him to verify his story, treating him like a potential criminal rather than someone doing his job. The story had spread through the neighborhood's informal networks, growing more dramatic with each retelling. By the time it reached Victoria, Marcus had been transformed from a delivery driver doing his job into a suspicious individual who had been behaving aggressively when questioned by concerned residents. Victoria knew better. She'd seen Marcus's professionalism, his respect for others, his commitment to doing his job well. The idea that he would be aggressive with customers was absurd. But her neighbors didn't know what she knew. They were reacting to assumptions, stereotypes, and fears that she had once shared. The breaking point came at the neighborhood association meeting where the petition was to be discussed. Victoria attended reluctantly, still uncertain about her role in the conversation but unable to stay away. The meeting was held in the community center of their exclusive development, a room decorated with American flags and portraits of the founding fathers, symbols of ideals that felt increasingly complex to Victoria. Priscilla Hartford was leading the discussion, her voice filled with righteous conviction. "We're not talking about discrimination," she insisted. "We're talking about maintaining property values and ensuring the safety of our families. When unknown individuals frequent our streets, it creates security concerns." Unknown individuals? Victoria found herself speaking before she'd consciously decided to. "You mean people doing their jobs?" The room turned to look at her with surprise. Priscilla's smile was patient but strained. "Victoria, dear, of course we appreciate the services these people provide, but surely you understand the need for appropriate boundaries." "What I understand," Victoria said, her voice growing stronger, "is that we're about to pass a petition targeting working people who are simply trying to earn a living." She stood up, her hands shaking slightly but her resolve firm. "And what I really understand is that this isn't about traffic or safety. It's about keeping certain kinds of people out of our neighborhood." Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the room. Helen Morrison stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Victoria, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this community has standards. We have a right to protect our investment in our homes." "By targeting black delivery drivers?" Victoria asked directly. "Because let's be honest about what this petition is really about." The room erupted. Several people began speaking at once, voices raised in indignation and denial. Priscilla called for order, her composure slipping for the first time in Victoria's memory. "Victoria Whitman, that is an outrageous accusation," Margaret Thornberry declared. "We are not racist. We are homeowners protecting our community." "Then why?" Victoria asked, her voice cutting through the noise. "Have none of you ever complained about the landscaping trucks? Or the pool maintenance vehicles? Or the catering vans when we host our parties? Why is it only the delivery services, the ones more likely to employ people who don't look like us, that need to be regulated?" The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria could see the discomfort on faces around the room, the recognition of truth they didn't want to acknowledge. "I won't be signing this petition," Victoria announced. And I think anyone who cares about fairness and basic human decency should reconsider their position. She left the meeting to a chorus of shocked whispers and wounded protests, knowing that she had just burned bridges with people who had been her social circle for 15 years. But as she walked to her car under the streetlights of her exclusive neighborhood, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The lightness that comes from living according to your actual values rather than your social expectations. The aftermath of the neighborhood association meeting was swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, Victoria found herself effectively ostracized from the social circles that had defined her identity for decades. Lunch invitations were withdrawn, committee positions were quietly reassigned, and conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Emma noticed the change immediately. "Mom, why did Mrs. Hartford hang up when I answered the phone yesterday? And why did Sophia's mom say I couldn't come to their pool party this weekend?" Victoria sat her daughter down in their living room, surrounded by the luxury that had once felt like validation, but now seemed like isolation. "Emma, I need to tell you about some things I've learned about myself lately, and some choices I've made that are going to affect both of us." She told Emma about Marcus Thompson, about witnessing his volunteer work, about the conversations that had opened her eyes to her own prejudices. She explained the neighborhood petition, the meeting, and her decision to speak out against what she now recognized as systemic discrimination disguised as community standards. "So you're saying all my friends' parents are racist?" Emma asked, her 16-year-old worldview struggling to process the complexity. "I'm saying we all live in a system that makes it easy to have prejudices without examining them," Victoria replied carefully, "including me. For years, I made assumptions about people based on their race, their jobs, their neighborhoods. I thought I was just being practical or protecting our family, but I was really just protecting my own comfort." Emma was quiet for several minutes. Finally, she asked, "What happens now? Now we figure out who we want to be instead of who we thought we were supposed to be." The first step came the following Saturday, when Victoria drove to Roosevelt Elementary to volunteer. She'd called ahead and spoken with Mrs. Patricia Davis, the teacher she'd seen working with Marcus, explaining that she wanted to help with literacy programs. Mrs. Davis was polite but cautious when Victoria arrived. "Mrs. Whitman, can I ask what brought you to us? We don't usually get volunteers from Scarsdale." Victoria chose honesty. "I've been learning some uncomfortable things about my own prejudices lately. I saw Marcus Thompson volunteering here and I realized I'd made assumptions about people that were completely wrong. I want to do something meaningful instead of just writing checks and feeling good about myself." Mrs. Davis studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of condescension or charity tourism. What she saw instead was genuine humility and determination. "Okay, Mrs. Whitman, but I need you to understand, these children don't need pity. They need respect, consistency, and people who see their potential instead of their circumstances." "I understand," Victoria said. "And please call me Victoria." That morning, Victoria read with 6-year-old Aiden, whose bright smile and curious questions reminded her of Emma at that age. She helped 8-year-old Keisha with math problems, discovering that the girl had an intuitive understanding of numbers that far exceeded her grade level. She listened to 10-year-old Jerome read a story about space exploration, his enthusiasm infectious as he stumbled over complex words but never gave up. When Marcus arrived for his regular Saturday session, he stopped short at seeing Victoria sitting cross-legged on the classroom floor, helping a group of children with art projects. "Mrs. Whitman?" His surprise was evident. "What are you doing here?" "Learning," Victoria replied simply. "And trying to do something useful?" Mrs. Davis watched the interaction carefully. "Marcus, Victoria volunteered to help with our literacy program. She's been here since 8 this morning." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. After the children left for recess, he approached Victoria hesitantly. "Can I ask what changed your mind about all this?" Victoria looked around the classroom, at the outdated textbooks, the donated supplies, the bulletin boards covered with student work that showed creativity and intelligence despite limited resources. "You did," she said quietly. "Watching you here, seeing what you give to these children, realizing how completely wrong I was about who you are and what you represent. I've spent years contributing money to feel better about inequality instead of actually engaging with it. And now I'm trying to figure out how to be a better person. starting with listening more and assuming less. That afternoon, Marcus offered to show Victoria around the neighborhood surrounding the school, a world she'd driven through but never really seen. They walked past apartment buildings where multiple families shared small spaces, corner stores that served as community centers, and bus stops where people waited patiently for transportation that might come on time or might not. "This is where I grew up," Marcus said, stopping in front of a modest house with a well-tended garden. "My mother still lives here. She raised 3 kids as a single parent while working 2 jobs. All 3 of us graduated college, but when the recession hit, I was the first teacher laid off because I was the newest hire." Victoria listened without offering platitudes or solutions, beginning to understand that her role was to witness rather than fix. "The delivery job pays the bills and lets me stay in the community," Marcus continued. "I could probably find teaching work in the suburbs, but these kids need consistency. They need to see people who look like them succeeding, struggling, and showing up anyway." As they walked back to the school, Victoria felt a shift in how Marcus was speaking to her, less carefully, more openly, as if he was beginning to trust that her questions came from genuine curiosity rather than polite obligation. "Thank you," she said as they reached their cars, "for showing me your world, for trusting me with it." "Thank you for caring enough to ask," Marcus replied. "Most people don't." That evening, Victoria called Emma into her study and showed her daughter the Roosevelt Elementary website, the photos of students, the fundraising needs. "I want to establish a scholarship fund," Victoria said. "Not through some charity organization where we never meet the recipients. A direct fund where we get to know the students, follow their progress, celebrate their achievements." Emma studied her mother's face, seeing determination where there had once been comfortable complacency. "What about your friends? What about the country club and all that?" "Real friends will understand," Victoria replied. "The others? Well, maybe I need better friends. Hello, the Shade of Love family. So happy you're here. Before we jump into the next part of the story, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments. Also, how's the story been so far? We love reading your thoughts. Yes, every single comment. And it really keeps us motivated. Let's aim for 50 comments on this video. Think we can hit it? Your support means the world, so don't forget to comment, share, and keep the energy flowing. Chapter 11. Her public stand. The moment that defined Victoria's complete transformation came 6 weeks later, at the annual Westchester County Education Foundation Gala, an event where wealthy donors gathered to celebrate their charitable contributions while maintaining comfortable distance from the actual recipients of their generosity. Victoria attended reluctantly, knowing it would be her first public appearance since the neighborhood association incident. Emma accompanied her, both of them dressed in elegant gowns that now felt like costumes for a role Victoria was no longer willing to play. The evening began predictably. Polite but cool greetings from former friends, conversations that died when she approached, the subtle social exile that came with challenging the group's shared assumptions. Victoria endured it all with growing resolve, remembering the faces of the children at Roosevelt Elementary who deserved better than charitable scraps from guilty consciences. The breaking point came during the keynote address by Dr. Richard Pemberton, Diane's husband and a prominent education administrator. His speech was filled with familiar rhetoric about lifting up deserving students and rewarding academic excellence while carefully avoiding any discussion of systemic inequality or resource disparities. "We must remember," Dr. Pemberton declared from the podium, "that true educational achievement comes from within. No amount of funding can substitute for personal responsibility, family values, and the drive to succeed. Our scholarship programs identify students who demonstrate these qualities, young people who prove they deserve our investment." Victoria felt anger building in her chest as she thought about Keisha, the 8-year-old math prodigy whose potential was being wasted in an underfunded classroom, and Jerome, whose love of reading was constrained by outdated textbooks and limited library resources. When Dr. Pemberton opened the floor for comments, Victoria surprised herself by standing up. The room turned to look at her, conversations stopping as attention focused on the woman who had recently become notorious for her radical views on race and class. "Dr. Pemberton," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, I have a question about the criteria for determining which students deserve our support. Dr. Pemberton's smile was patronizing. Of course, Victoria. We look for academic achievement, community involvement, and evidence of strong character. And how do we measure academic achievement in students who attend schools with outdated textbooks, overcrowded classrooms, and no funding for arts or advanced programs? Victoria asked. How do we evaluate community involvement from children whose parents work multiple jobs just to survive? How do we assess character in young people who have already shown more resilience and determination than most of us will ever need? Murmurs of discomfort rippled through the audience. Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger. I've been volunteering at Roosevelt Elementary for 2 months now. I've met children who are brilliant, creative, and motivated despite having access to resources we wouldn't consider adequate for our pet grooming, let alone human education. These children don't need to prove they deserve our help. They deserve our help because they're children, because they're human beings, because in a just society, every child would have access to quality education regardless of their zip code or their parents' income. Margaret Thornberry stood up, her face flushed with anger. Victoria, this is hardly the appropriate venue for political speeches. We're here to celebrate our community's generosity, not to be lectured about social justice. Are we generous? Victoria asked, turning to address the room directly. Or are we just comfortable? Are we actually solving problems? Or are we just managing our guilt while maintaining the systems that create these problems in the first place? The room erupted in shocked whispers and indignant protests. Victoria raised her voice to be heard over the noise. I'm not here to attack anyone's character or question anyone's intentions, but I am here to say that charity without justice is just a way to feel good about inequality. If we really cared about education, we'd be advocating for fair funding formulas. If we really cared about these children, we'd be using our privilege to challenge the systems that limit their opportunities instead of just writing checks to feel better about ourselves. Priscilla Hartford stood up, her composure completely gone. Victoria Whitman, you have lost your mind. We have given thousands of dollars to support education. And I've given thousands of dollars too, Victoria interrupted. But I've also started showing up. I've started listening to the children we claim to care about, learning about their real needs, understanding that our comfortable assumptions about merit and opportunity are often just justifications for maintaining inequality. She looked around the room, seeing faces she had known for years, people who had been guests in her home, women who had shared her values and priorities. I'm not asking you to agree with me, but I am asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, our perspective from the top of the economic pyramid doesn't give us the clearest view of what's actually happening in our community. As Victoria sat down, the room remained silent for several long moments. Finally, Dr. Pemberton cleared his throat and attempted to move the program forward, but the energy had shifted. Conversations during dinner were subdued, the comfortable certainty of the evening shattered by questions that no one wanted to examine too closely. When the event ended, Victoria and Emma walked to their car in silence. As they reached the parking lot, they heard footsteps behind them. Mrs. Whitman, called a voice they recognized. They turned to see Marcus Thompson, dressed in a simple suit, walking toward them from the catering company van he'd been driving. Marcus? Victoria said, surprised. You were working tonight? Catering company uses delivery drivers for big events sometimes, he replied. I heard your speech. The whole kitchen staff heard it, actually. We were watching from the service entrance. Emma looked between her mother and Marcus, beginning to understand the connection that had transformed her family's life. Thank you, Marcus said simply. For saying what needed to be said, for seeing what needed to be seen. Victoria felt tears she hadn't expected. Thank you for showing me how much I didn't know about the world. As Marcus walked back toward the van, Emma took her mother's arm. Mom, are we going to be okay? I mean, financially, socially, all of that? Victoria looked back at the hotel where her former social circle was probably dissecting her speech, labeling her as unstable or radicalized. Then she thought about the children at Roosevelt Elementary, about Marcus's quiet dignity, about the person she was becoming instead of the person she had been. We're going to be better than okay, sweetheart. We're going to be real. 6 months after the Education Foundation Gala, Victoria Whitman stood in the Roosevelt Elementary Library watching Marcus Thompson lead a group of third graders through an advanced reading exercise. The library had been renovated with funds from the scholarship program she'd established. But more importantly, It hummed with the energy of children who finally had access to books, computers, and learning resources that matched their curiosity and potential. "Mrs. Victoria," called Aiden, the 6-year-old who had been among the first students she'd worked with. He was now reading at a 4th-grade level, his confidence transformed along with his skills. "Look what I wrote!" He handed her a story about a boy who wanted to be a scientist, complete with illustrations and a plot that showed genuine creativity. "This is wonderful, Aiden," Victoria said, kneeling to his level. "You're becoming quite the author." As the children worked on their projects, Victoria found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The woman who had once dismissed Marcus as just another delivery driver now understood him to be one of the most principled and dedicated educators she'd ever met. The community she'd once seen as her natural home now felt like a beautiful prison she'd needed to escape. The changes hadn't been without cost. Victoria's social circle had effectively excommunicated her, and Emma had struggled with losing friends whose parents disapproved of the Whitman family's radical evolution. But Emma had also gained something precious, a worldview based on empathy rather than entitlement, relationships built on genuine connection rather than social status. "Mom," Emma said, joining her mother in the library after finishing her own tutoring session with middle school students, "I got accepted to Howard University." Victoria smiled, remembering how different this conversation would have been a year ago. Then, Emma's college choices had been limited to prestigious, predominantly white institutions that would maintain their family's social trajectory. Now, Emma had chosen Howard because she wanted to study social justice and education policy, because she wanted to be part of solutions rather than just beneficiaries of problems. "How do you feel about it?" Victoria asked. "Excited, nervous, ready to learn from people who understand things I'm just beginning to figure out." Emma paused, watching Marcus help a struggling reader sound out complex words with infinite patience. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you and Marcus—" Is there something happening between you two?" Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the months of working together at the school, she and Marcus had developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to the children. But recently, their conversations had grown more personal, their comfortable working relationship deepening into something that felt like the beginning of genuine romantic connection. "Would that bother you?" Victoria asked carefully. Emma considered the question seriously. "A year ago, it would have horrified me. Not because Marcus isn't wonderful, I can see that he is, but because of what it would have meant for our social position, our reputation, all the things I thought mattered." She smiled. "Now? I think it would be amazing. Marcus makes you happier than you've been since Dad died. And more importantly, he makes you more yourself." That evening, Victoria and Marcus walked through the neighborhood surrounding Roosevelt Elementary, a routine they'd developed after their Saturday volunteer sessions. The area looked different to Victoria now, not like a place to drive through quickly with doors locked, but like a community with its own rhythms, relationships, and quiet dignity. Emma got into Howard, Victoria mentioned as they passed the community center, where Marcus coached a youth basketball team. "That's fantastic," Marcus replied genuinely. "She's going to do incredible things. You've raised an amazing young woman. I'm not sure I can take credit for how she's turned out," Victoria said. "I think she's becoming amazing in spite of how I raised her, not because of it." They stopped at a small park, where children played on equipment that had been repaired through community fundraising efforts, the kind of grassroots organizing Victoria was, learning to support rather than simply writing checks. Victoria," Marcus said, turning to face her. "Can I tell you something?" "Always. When I first met you, at the coffee shop during our accident, even in those early days at the school, I saw you as someone who would never really understand. Someone who might mean well but would always see people like me as projects rather than people." He smiled gently. "I was wrong. You weren't entirely wrong," Victoria replied. "I did see you as a project at first. Another way to feel good about myself while maintaining comfortable distance from real change. But you didn't stay there. You kept showing up, kept asking questions, kept letting yourself be uncomfortable until the discomfort transformed into understanding." Marcus reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. "That takes courage most people don't have." Victoria felt the warmth of his touch, the rightness of connection that transcended the social barriers that had once seemed impermeable. I'm still learning, still making mistakes, still discovering how much I don't know. That's what makes you different, Marcus said. You're willing to not know. Most people would rather be certain and wrong than uncertain and growing. As they walked back toward their cars, Victoria thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, comfortable in her assumptions, secure in her privilege, convinced that her charitable contributions and polite interactions constituted meaningful engagement with social justice. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she could barely recognize or understand. "Marcus," she said as they reached the school parking lot, "I have something I want to ask you." "What's that?" "Would you like to have dinner sometime? Not as volunteers, not as co-workers, but as whatever we're becoming." His smile was radiant. "I thought you'd never ask." 3 weeks later, Victoria stood in her kitchen preparing dinner for Marcus, their first official date, taking place in her home because she wanted Emma to be part of whatever was developing between them. As she chopped vegetables and seasoned chicken, she reflected on the irony that the most authentic relationship of her adult life was blooming from the ashes of everything she'd once thought defined her worth. When Marcus arrived, carrying flowers for both Victoria and Emma, the evening unfolded with easy conversation, genuine laughter, and the comfortable intimacy of people who had already seen each other at their most real. "So," Emma said over dessert, grinning mischievously, "if you two get married, can we move to a neighborhood with actual diversity? I'm tired of being the only family in Scarsdale who isn't afraid of delivery drivers." Victoria nearly choked on her wine, while Marcus laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. "Emma Rose Whitman," Victoria scolded, but she was laughing too. "What? I'm just saying, it might be nice to live somewhere that reflects our actual values instead of our old pretensions." Later, as Marcus prepared to leave, he and Victoria stood on her front porch, surrounded by the manicured perfection of her exclusive neighborhood. The house across the street belonged to Priscilla Hartford, who had made it clear through various intermediaries that Victoria's relationship with Marcus was the final confirmation of her complete moral decline. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked quietly. "Dating me will cost you everything you have left of your old life." Victoria looked around at the beautiful homes, the perfectly maintained lawns, the luxury cars in every driveway. A year ago, this had been her world, her identity, her security. Now it felt like an elaborate stage set for a play she no longer wanted to perform. "Marcus," she said, taking his hands, "my old life was built on ignorance, privilege, and the comfort that comes from not questioning systems that benefit you. This," she gestured between them, toward the school where they volunteered, toward the community they were building together. "This is real life. This is the life I choose." As he drove away, Victoria remained on her porch for several minutes, looking up at stars that seemed brighter than they had in years. Tomorrow, she would face whatever social consequences came from publicly dating Marcus Thompson. There would be whispered conversations, withdrawn invitations, and the continued erosion of relationships that had never been as solid as she'd believed. But there would also be Saturday mornings at Roosevelt Elementary, watching children discover their own potential. There would be community meetings where she could use her privilege to amplify voices that deserved to be heard. There would be the ongoing work of becoming someone whose actions matched her values, whose relationships were built on authenticity rather than convenience. And there would be Marcus, patient, principled, generous Marcus, who had shown her that love, like justice, required the courage to see beyond comfortable assumptions to the complex, beautiful, challenging reality of who people actually are, rather than who we expect them to be. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria Whitman felt truly wealthy, rich in purpose, abundant in genuine relationships, prosperous in the knowledge that she was finally becoming the person she was meant to be. The transformation was complete, but the journey was just beginning.